Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Goling, and this is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, broadcasting from Kingston, Jamaica, but broadcasting as well through Irish to the Jamaican community in New York. They're joining us at just around this time. They normally join us at 1 o'clock, but because of daylight saving time, the time adjustment, we have them with us now, and we're going to be hailing up Beauregard in a short while. But it's Jamaica Live. Last week, those of you who tuned in, let me offer my apologies. I could not be here last week because of some unforeseen circumstances. But I'm glad that you're back. I'm glad that you have joined me. We have what I think is a very interesting program today. We're going to be, we deal with one issue at a time, one issue each program. And the issue we have chosen for today is one that I think we as a people, we as a country, especially our policymakers, we need to spend some time discussing. We need to focus on it. And we're very fortunate today. We have a number of guests lined up who will bring tremendous expertise and experience to this discussion. And I'm sure that their contributions will add great value to the topic. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that my listeners will find it not just interesting but instructive. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Poverty exists in every country. Even in the richest countries, there are people who are just not making it. They may be facing particular challenges, physical or mental infirmities. They may have been the victims of peculiar circumstances that has affected their lives. They may have missed the opportunity, or perhaps, as is so often the case, not made good use of the opportunity to be educated, to acquire an income-earning skill so that they are able to look after themselves. Even in the United States, the richest country in the world, there are 38 million people, 10% of the population, who live below the poverty line. Now, in countries like Jamaica, in what is called developing countries, there is a large segment of the population that struggles every day to provide themselves with the basic necessities of life, food, clothing, shelter. They live on unhealthy diets because cheap food, which is what they can barely afford, is most times not good for them. No wonder so many of them suffer from obesity and diabetes and hypertension and heart problems and have kidney disease. On their own, they can't afford good health care and medicines. Don't even talk about meeting the costs of schooling their children, finding the money to buy the shoes and the uniforms and the books, the bus fares, the lunch money. So many of their children end up being just as poor as they are. And the cycle of poverty continues from one generation to the next. No government can ignore this predicament. In every country, the government has to step in to help those who can't help themselves. But how does the government step in? How does it help? Traditionally, what the government does is to identify those needs that are important to the poor and to find a way to lessen the burden there. So, for example, when the government imposes GCT, 15% that you pay at the shop, it makes sure to exempt, to exclude from GCT those items that the poor depend heavily on. So things like what are called basic foods, bread, flour, cornmeal, cooking oil, chicken meat and other meats, vegetables, grown provisions, those things don't attract GCT. No GCT is charged either on prescription drugs. We even keep the GCT off sporting goods so that poor people's children can afford to buy a pair of football boots and have a chance of becoming another Raheem Sterling. There are many other ways in which the government tries to ease the burden on the poor. So it provides free health care at public hospitals and clinics. It provides free tuition at government primary and secondary schools. It used to cover as much as 80% of university tuition costs, although I believe that figure has declined in recent years. All of this intervention by the government costs money, a lot of money. When flour is exempt from GCT, for example, it is a lot of GCT revenue that the government is losing. And other taxes have to be imposed in order to be able to collect the money to pay the public sector workers and to provide vehicles for the police and buses for the JUTC and to fix the roads and to collect the garbage and to provide the water supplies, etc., 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 etc. Attending school or going to a hospital may be free for the parent or the patient, but it is not free to the taxpayer. They have to pay the taxes to keep the hospitals working and to keep the schools going. Now you might say, well, what is wrong with that? What else you going to do? Now so it have to set. Now it is true that government can't turn a blind eye. No government anywhere in the world can completely ignore the plight of the poor. Those that even flex to do so, they are either voted out or they are violently overthrown. But is the way we try to help the poor the most efficient, the most effective way to help the poor? Let me explain what I mean. When we exempt prescription drugs from GCT, sure, it helps the poor because they have to fill that prescription because they have to treat the blood pressure or the diabetes. But the rich man or rich woman who earns millions and millions of dollars, they too may suffer from hypertension and diabetes, and they too have to fill prescriptions. They could easily afford to pay the GCT. It wouldn't raise their eyebrows one bit. But they also benefit from the GCT exemption, which was motivated by our desire to help the poor, not to help the rich, to help the poor. Which means that we lose the GCT that we could have collected from the rich to help to fix the roads and to support the police in fighting crime and so on. In the same way, when we provide free tuition and free health care, sure, it eases the burden on the poor because some of them wouldn't be able to find the money to send the kid to school or to go to hospital. But that same multimillionaire sends his children to the same schools, whether it's Wolmer's or Casey or George's or Immaculate. He could well afford to pay for the tuition for his children. It wouldn't cause them any nosebleed. And that money would have helped to improve the facilities at the school and pay the teachers a better salary. I'm not done yet. When we exempt cornmeal and chicken back from GCT, fine. It means that it is easier for the poor to buy a pound of cornmeal and 2 pounds of chicken back. But that same millionaire is buying the same GCT-free cornmeal and the same GCT-free chicken back. Not to cook dinner for himself, and buy to feed the dogs. And neither him nor the dog would feel it if he had to pay GCT on those things. Some of the discussions on this matter is contaminated by foolish populism. Like, how you put GCT on sanitary napkin? We expect the poor woman them to do. But the well-off woman also uses sanitary napkins. And she could well afford to pay the GCT, and that GCT that she could pay, that money could be used to help the poor woman to buy the sanitary napkins with all the GCT on it. You know, if the government were to announce tomorrow that it is removing GCT from something else that many poor people have to buy, and I don't know if any such thing still exists because most of them are already free from GCT. But if the government were to do that, there would be great rejoicing. Government will look out for poor people them. But in truth and in fact, it is discriminating against poor people them. How do I arrive at that? Because everybody, rich and poor alike, enjoy the benefit. In other words, the benefit has to be spread thin for everybody. So the poor people who really need the benefit get less benefit because the benefit has to share up for so much people. If everybody had to pay the GCT, it would provide more money to help the poor people so that they could buy the things, pay the GCT, and still be better off. The government, spends about $18 billion a year in direct assistance to the poor and the vulnerable. They spend that money through programs like PATH and social housing. Recently, the government introduced a new social pension program to provide a little money each month for those poor people who are not on PATH and don't get any benefit from the NIS. Over 12,000 persons, I'm told, have so far signed up for this program. So that's another area where the government is spending money directly to help poor people. But if you were to add to that the $18 billion a year we spend on PATH, whatever it is now we're going to be spending on the social pension, if you were to add to that the money that it costs the government to provide the free tuition at high schools and free tuition at primary schools, add to that the money it costs to provide the free hospital care and the free clinic visits, add up all of that. And add to that as well the amount of revenue that the government gives up by allowing everybody, rich, poor, and in between, to buy things at the supermarket and at the pharmacy GCT free. If you were to add up all of that money, it would come to billions and billions of dollars. And if you were to take those billions of dollars and say, well, all right, now, we're not going to scatter this, make everybody gobble it up. We're going to use these billions and billions of dollars to help out the people them who really need it. The people them who can't find the dinner money. We're going to provide them with help to make sure that they can buy the food that they need, pay the GCT on it. They can go to the pharmacy and fill the prescription, pay the GCT on it. They can send the children to school, pay the tuition, because we are providing the money directly to them, the ones that need it. Not to everybody, including the millionaires. If we were to find a way to do that, the poor that we all love so much, the poor that we are, all of us, say that, boy, our commitment is to help poor people, the poor would be much better off. So that little woman who we believe we're helping right now, instead of buying £2 of chicken back, we would be able to give her the kind of help, the kind of assistance that would put her in a position to buy a whole chicken so that the children at home can get a good dinner. Not fight over a little chicken back that have more bone and fat on it than meat. Let me say this. Helpful though it is, the assistance we provide to the poor may not be able to do any more than just help to sustain them in their poverty. It cannot lift them out of poverty. But if we were able to provide more meaningful assistance by a well-designed, well-targeted program to shift benefits from those who can do without it to those families who really need it, so that they can raise healthy children and support them in their schooling, they would be in a much better position to raise themselves out of poverty and eventually wouldn't need the government help no more because they would be on their own. They would be able to be on their own. So the issue we want to explore today is, are there more efficient ways to provide relief to the poor and vulnerable? Can we find ways to target the assistance so that those who really need it are the ones who get it instead of the scattershot way, where we just scatter the benefits for everybody, any and everybody, rich and poor alike, to gobble it up? And if that is a better way to do it, how do we design the mechanisms to get it to work right so that only those who need it get the benefit, and so that nobody who needs it is left out? One way of doing this would be to have some kind of means test, a system where, a system that enables us to identify those people whose circumstances, their income, their livelihood, the size of their families, place them within the target category. This is not easy to do. Not when the majority of the poor don't have a regular weekly or fortnightly pay slip that you can check. Most of them hustle. A day's work here and another day's work there, a little cultivating, raising some backyard chickens, washing 2 cars at a plaza, selling a few oranges and ripe banana on the sidewalk. That's how they live. But we have made some headway. The PATH program that was introduced by P.J. Patterson in 2001 has established a platform. It provides direct cash benefits to persons to help to meet the cost of food, medicine, and the schooling of children. For this financial year, the government is spending about $8 billion to provide PATH benefits. And PATH has developed a mechanism for identifying and registering persons who fall within a defined category, considered to be in need of assistance. But it is not perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. PATH currently has about 350,000 people registered on the program. So 350,000 people are getting some PATH benefit. But the PATH benefit is small. But it's 350,000, so give thanks. But the statistics show that about 20% of our population falls below the poverty line. What is that poverty line? The international poverty line is currently around the equivalent of $335 Jamaican dollars per person per day. That means that a family of 5, a man and a woman and 3 children, whose income, all the earnings that they can hustle for the week, is less than $11,725 per week. That family is considered to be below the poverty line. Now, with a poverty rate of 20%, it means that there are about 500,000 Jamaicans who are living below the poverty line. on less than $11,725 a week. 5,000 Jamaicans in families who are living on a family income of less than $11,725 a week. So even though PATH is assisting around 350,000 people, it means that there are about 150,000 persons out there who have been left out. How do they manage? The truth is that they don't manage. Many of them go to bed hungry at nights. Their children are not going to school, or they go to school only when they can manage to send them. When they get sick, sometimes they die because they can't afford to buy the medicine that they need. And the bush medicine that they have to rely on don't necessarily work. Sometimes the bush medicine kill them faster. It may be that 350,000 people is all that the amount of money the government can provide can cover. But it could also be that our method of identifying those in need requires a makeover. Because we need to find those 150,000 people who are living in abject poverty but who are not in the PATH program. We need to identify them, or we need to rescue them. In 2023, we cannot have people going to bed hungry. We cannot have children not going to school. We cannot have people dying because they can't afford the medicine. Not when so much Mercedes-Benz and so much BMW running up and down on the road. Not when so many high-end houses and apartments are being constructed all over the place. Not when so much people earning a whole bag of money. And when them go to the supermarket, them buy the flour and them not paying a GCT on it. Because we believe that we're helping the poor by removing the GCT. And when they go to pharmacy and buy and fill the prescription, they're not paying a GCT on that. Them have the Benz park up outside, you know. Them have the BMW sitting on there. But they get a blight from the GCT because we believe we're helping poor people. If we are to reconfigure the system for assisting the poor and the vulnerable, there are some other issues that we need to address. First, and very important, I want to stress this one. We have to eliminate as far as possible the stigma and the embarrassment that people who have to depend on public assistance have to suffer. I remember in the old days when I was a little boy growing up, people used to have to register. We used to call it dole, pauper's roll. And the paupers, them used to have to go line up each fortnight at a government office to receive the little dole. It was demeaning. It robbed them of their dignity. I remember even back in the 70s, when the government introduced a food stamp program, some people were embarrassed when they got to the supermarket and them reach the cashier. And them take out the food stamp to pay for the little groceries. Other people sometimes would look on them away. Even in recent times, when children of the poor have to line up at school to get a free lunch, while the children of the more affluent are able to go to the canteen and flash money out of their pocket to buy lunch. It is demeaning. It robs them of their dignity and their sense of equalness, which is so vital to their personality development and their self-worth. But modern technology has assisted us to remove much of this stigma. Some of the PATH benefits are now being paid by check, and it is even possible for it to be electronically transmitted to an individual's bank account if they have one, so that they can go shop at the supermarket and buy the medicine at the pharmacy with cash, or they can present a debit card just like anybody else without the embarrassment and indignity, because nobody would know where that money is coming from. They wouldn't have to tender any PATH voucher. They can withdraw the cash at an ATM and give the children them little bus fare and them lunch money to go to school. The other issue that has to be addressed is how to ensure that the register of beneficiaries continues to be of those persons who qualify and continue to qualify for the benefit. A family may be below the poverty line today, but the father or mother may acquire a skill, especially if we can give them meaningful benefits. They may acquire a skill and start earning a reasonable wage. Or maybe with the assistance from PATH, they send the children to school, the children do well and get some good jobs so that the family is able to raise itself out of poverty. How do we remove them from the program? Because they would no longer need it. And if we are able to remove them from the program, we may be able to increase the benefits to those who still have to be on the program. We're exploring all of these issues today with some very distinguished guests. As I said, these are persons who have brought who are going to be able to bring tremendous expertise and experience to the discussion. And I believe that my listeners are going to find the program very interesting. It's Jamaica Live. Soon come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. I want to hail up our New York audience now. Irish Jam. Beauregard, come to me.
Good afternoon, Mr. Goldie.
What up, big man?
Day here and I enjoy some rainy weather this afternoon, 45 degrees.
What's the temperature like up there?
45 degrees today.
And you call that warm?
Yeah, it's nice. It's actually nice. It's actually nice. Not going to lie. But other than that, we're enjoying also the start of March Madness.
Yes.
And, that's basketball for college students. So big respect to all of them. Everybody who's interested and excited about it. We're all excited over this side. Speaking of the students, I'm glad to see that the teachers came to an agreement and they're going back to work.
And the doctors too.
Oh, the doctors. Doctors were on strike as well.
Yeah,
okay.
the junior doctors.
Okay.
I think the police are almost there.
Wow.
But still hear some rumblings coming out of the immigration officers.
So
but,
everybody,
I believe we're getting there, you know.
Everyone wants a raise and deserves a raise.
And
yes.
it's not unreasonable.
Exactly.
But it's like the child going to school. You want more lunch money, but the parents say, look, it's only $15 off and it's tray you, so it's $5 a piece,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
that's basically what it is. But hail up everybody for me.
I'll do that.
We're having a good program today. I hope your people will enjoy it.
Yes, they will. We're here listening.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I raised the issue, the topic today. We want to look at the big question as to how do we go about designing an effective and affordable social safety net. All of them rantings you heard me going on with when we opened, that's what it's about. We have to provide a social safety net for the poor and vulnerable. Some people are poor, some of them because of them own what listed in them, and I'll tell a lie. But some of them are poor just because of the circumstances in which they were born, the circumstances in which they live. Some of them have physical problems, some of them have mental problems. The scripture that tells us the poor will always be with us. But because the poor will always be with us, we can't just say, well, all right, you are there. We have to find a way to help look after them. So the big issue is, what's the best way to help them? What's the best way to design a social safety net that can take care of the vulnerable in our population? And my first guest, somebody who I'm so happy to have, joining this particular discussion because of his own, not just his own training, but especially his own experience. I'm talking about former Minister of Finance and former Leader of the Opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips. Peter, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
How have you been?
I'm good, giving God thanks. Actually, keeping well.
That's good.
Still getting some treatment, but so far so good.
Yeah.
And hope for the best.
Yeah, well, you're being heard not just here in Jamaica, but you're being heard by the New York community as well, because we broadcast live through Irish Jam. So I'm sure that they're very pleased to hear you. Tell me, Peter.
Yes.
Trying to provide a good safety net. You and I have been there, right?
Yes.
You have to take the GCT off of this, and you have to take GCT off of that. Mm-hmm. And, we try the free education, we try the free hospital care and so on. But we scattershotting the money all over the place.
I think we have learned one of the good programs, and I think everybody will agree, despite the fact that it has things that can be improved, has been the PATH program, and that provides a direct subsidy to some critical categories of persons, pregnant mothers, young mothers, and to particularly vulnerable families in single female-headed households. And the critical point being is that it provides a direct subsidy, because I think we have all realized that when you provide it generally, like say providing a general subsidy by virtue of tax relief or something to foodstuffs that are widely consumed, you end up both subsidizing people who can support themselves, including the very wealthy, and at the expense of public finances, and oftentimes you really are wasting money. So I think we can settle on the positive experience of the PATH program, but there are other critical areas that we have to think about, and you mentioned them in your lead up, because I think we have to look particularly at health care, and in some sense we need to look at the education problem. We have always had this problem with health care, and successive administrations. I mean, the PNP at one point said, well, it was going to give to free health care to everybody under 18. Subsequently, hospital care was expanded. But there are problems with that, because the health sector, the institutions, the budget, still not able to carry the hospitals and enable them to give the quality service that they need to give.
We seem to be saying the same thing. I want to put something to you. You talk about the PATH program, and I acknowledge that, and it was introduced during P.J. Patterson's time. But we're spending $8 billion on PATH. Now, if all of them GCT that rich people could afford to pay for the flour and the cornmeal, and the prescription drugs, if we were able to, I don't know if anybody has even attempted to quantify it, but if we were able to get our hands on that PATH program, you wouldn't be talking about $8 billion. You'd be talking about a lot more.
You'd be talking about a lot more. No, that's absolutely correct. And the truth is that we have to look at how we're going to be able to afford some of the services that the society expects, and which, quite frankly, should receive. Now, take the health care, because I think what we really have to do in the healthcare is rather than providing the subsidy to everybody, is again to pick out the vulnerable and see how do we, the most vulnerable, and see how can we do it. And for a long time, we've been discussing, going all the way back to the 80s, if my memory is correct. I think Ken Barr was Minister of Health when the first efforts to look at national health insurance.
You're right.
Were undertaken. And because the only way is to probably mandate, as part of a general wage package, all employment institutions, all business places over a certain size to provide a part payment for health insurance. About 20% of the country that is insured. you could probably get another 20%. But then somewhere along the line, we have to say to people who can afford it, you will have to afford health care or pay the full cost. And then say to like path-dependent people, for example, that this government will pay your premium in the health care, because the only way the health institutions are going to work is if they can recover the cost of delivering the service.
Well, I want to come to that, but one of the concerns that I have is whether or not our mechanism for identifying the people who need intervention is as robust as it should be. We have 350,000 people on path. We have about 500,000 people who are below the poverty line. I am not sure, I don't know for certain, but I'm not sure that the reason why we have left out 150,000 is because the budget can't accommodate them. I suspect perhaps we don't have a mechanism for capturing them.
I think it's part of it. Because you see, the bottom line is, well, you're coming to a real question that we have to answer generally. Are we going to, is our wage structure and our distribution of wealth in the country going to be such that you're going to say that 1/3 of your labor force or 1/3 of your households just can't afford, can't earn a livable wage? Now, you know, that links us back to a lot of problems. But truthfully, if you're going to assist everybody who needs some assistance, PATH will have to grow not only in size, but in the quantity of the support that is given.
During your time, did you ever look at the experience of other countries in terms of how we deal with these cash transfers to see if we could identify what the best practices are? I know that during my time, one of the countries that we were told to look at was Chile. But then what I discovered when I studied their example was that their infrastructure to support that kind of system was so much more advanced than anything that we had, that we wouldn't be able to jump on it right away.
The irony is that the World Bank and others are promoting our system as a model to other countries.
Yes.
You know, and despite the problems, we have managed to contain the administrative costs a little bit. It would be, quite frankly, I think one of the benefits that will flow if we get the national identification system up and running. We can reduce the cost and maybe become more targeted in identifying the people who are in need. And so that's something that we definitely, that should be a benefit that we identify and work towards achieving from the whole needs experience when it comes online.
From the basket of, and I'm not going to take you too far down this road, but from the basket of goods that are on the zero rated or exempt GCT list, what percentage of the total basket would that represent?
That represents, of the total basket that is zero rated, the bulk of that now represents the larger share of consumption of poor households.
No, that's not what I wanted, you know.
Yeah.
Of everything that is sold, whether GCT, what percentage would the zero rated and exempt constitute in terms of value?
In terms of value, it's a significant value. I don't have the exact numbers. It's a significant value because it's the bulk of what is sold as far as foodstuff is concerned.
That's the flour and the sugar and the rice and so on.
Sugar, rice, and so on. And my own thinking at the time, I mean, you couldn't touch it because even though we moved a lot of the way, I mean, and I can tell you the political price paid in moving you to touch those basic things, especially when poorer households are spending 80% of their income on food. Would be catastrophic.
I'm just wondering, Peter, if we could, of course, we'd have to find a way to deal with the politics. But I'm just wondering whether we could ever get that path lady to the point where she could understand. Well, instead of the $3,000 that I'm getting from Path every month, I'm now getting $8,000. So I can't quarrel when I go to shop and I have to pay the GCT and the sugar and the rice. Would we ever be able to get that kind of understanding?
You'd have to at least get your overall GCT rate down.
Yes.
You know, because we talk about the 80 for the bottom 10%, but remember for those just above them, you're looking at 60%, 50% of your household income being spent on foodstuffs too.
Yes.
But it's where we have to go. If you get the GCT rate down, then you would be in the position of applying it to many more things.
Yes.
And then that would give you the income to really do it. You know?
Yes.
And I think overall now that, we're doing a lot of and I know there's been a lot about, this compensation review in the public sector, a lot of discussion. But overall, we have to look at ways of moving the wage rates as well as moving the productivity, because you can't really do much if the bulk of your population is living always on the edge,
Yes.
And that's really part of what we have to do, which brings into focus the educational reform and things. But we have ways, I believe, hate to keep, knocking it, but we do have scope, especially with the NHF and the monies that were the so-called sin taxes on rum and cigarettes and so, which were directed to the NHF. We do have a way where we could direct that and use it more effectively, I believe.
For people who need it.
For people who need it. So if we have dealt with the general vulnerability, or a good chunk of it with Path, the next big thing for us to tackle as a country, I believe, would be the healthcare.
Yeah.
Because that's another big chunk of the incomes of people who can't afford it.
Yes.
Literally, after they get the diagnosis of what is wrong and the doctor says, I need an X-ray, the next thing is to find somebody, church, MP, friend, family, to pay for the X-ray fee.
Well, I remember the experience, and I'm sure you have it too. I remember the experience I used to have when I was a member of Parliament. Somebody would come to you with a prescription.
Yeah.
Every Thursday when I left the constituency office, I would leave it a whole stack of prescriptions that my office used to find a way to get filled. Yeah. But when you look at some of the prescriptions were all 2-3 months old.
Exactly. Person is much worse.
Yes.
Than they were. This is really what's been happening.
Tell me, back to the PATH program, something I want to explore. I know a big chunk of it is to provide assistance for school, but one of the reasons why I'm trying to see if I can explore in my mind, how can we make it much more meaningful to the beneficiaries, is the fact that, and I said it when I was opening, that is one thing to just provide people with some assistance that sustains them in the poverty, but the real intention ought to be to try and lift them out of the poverty.
Absolutely.
Now, I mean, it's one thing if you're dealing with an elderly person who is 70 odd years old. But when you're dealing with a young mother and 3 children, she's 27 and she has 3 children between the ages of 4 and 10. You don't want her to be on PATH program for the next 20 years.
No. And so the question is how you structure that program to, well, right now the main thing it provides as far as schooling goes is food.
Yes.
But you really, we really have to look at the reform of education generally, the whole Patterson program, and really ensure that the children are getting the educational benefit. Maybe you should be providing other things like the tablet or the computer, but we try to do that generally anyway.
Yeah.
But maybe we should be making a specific provision.
That's right. Because that PATH beneficiary not going to be able to buy no tablet.
Yeah, no, exactly. So maybe we should be providing that. But the school, we really have to tackle that educational thing because we have made progress, but really with this low wage model of economic development, where what is attractive to the investors is the fact that we have low wages, but then that is to keep a good chunk of the population in the poverty that you speak of. The only way we can get there is really through the educational route.
Recently I did an exercise, Peter. It came out of the dispute with the teachers over salaries, no? And I did an exercise. I looked at what a teacher would earn, a teacher that migrates to New York, and I got some hard numbers.
Yes.
What they would earn. But then I say, but then it's not cheap to live in New York. I mean, a 1-bedroom apartment in New York cost you $3,000 a month. But even when I calculated all of that, the utilities, the cost of food in New York, what they were left with after all of that, and maybe I can't say so now because the teachers say, no?
Yes.
But what they were left with after they met all the expenses was about 2 times their gross here before expenses.
What they were left with?
Yes, after they pay all them living expenses.
Yeah.
Was about twice their gross Jamaican salary. And I'm talking about the salaries that were being offered to them in the new package.
Well,
so, I mean, the contrast was stark.
No, but that brings into focus the whole thing. When you read the Patterson report and the relative costs for the reform of education, the first impulse is to just say we'll never manage this. But then, if you still recognize that we have to get it if we're not going to just remain in this place with a lot of people just unable to make life, then it's going to require, again, a model on the education side, like I've been touting, on the health side, where the path is going to have, you're going to have to, well, let me put it this way, the only way we can meet the cost of that educational reform that I can see is that it's going to take the whole society to meet those expenses. The private businesses are going to have to voluntarily just step up and say, like some people doing. I was at a function, you were there too, at Med, where some of the private sector are agreeing to sponsor some STEM institutions. That's a step in the right kind of direction. Parents, quite frankly, who can afford it are going to have to put up and meet some of the costs. Many of them doing it already with extra lessons and all kinds of things that, if we could give them good schools, they wouldn't have to do it. And then the question that will arise is who will take care of, and this is where an expanded path will also have to come into play. Who is going to take care of those children from families who genuinely can't afford it? And that's where you have to look at the extended path program.
One of the things that I'm going to want to discuss, and I'm going to ask you if you're so willing to come back on at some time in the future.
Yeah, man.
I agree entirely with your analysis. But one of the fears I have,
yes,
if we were to do all of that, and if the teacher were able to smile at the end of the month and say, I'm really pleased with what I see has gone into my bank account for my salary, what kind of outcomes should we expect? I'm worried about that because as bad as things are, I don't believe that we're getting the outcomes that are commensurate. Now, I look back at my primary school days. I went to Alpha Primary, my teacher was Miss Hobson. Miss Hobson used to live on Gilcher Street in Wellington Town. She never drive no car. I got the impression she was able to, pay her light bill and live. Yes. But she wasn't rich. But rotted, man, I got one hell of an education in our class.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
But, on the other level, I agree absolutely. That but when I went to Money Primary, right? But when you look back at it, how many people were getting what you got?
That is true.
So,
that is true.
Or me at Money, because we got another chunk when we went home.
Yes, that is true. That is true. But not every one of my classmates, and we all did well. Not every one of them had two teachers waiting at home as your parents.
No.
But they did well. Because Miss Hobson saw to it that they did well.
They saw to it that they did well. But there were many who didn't. But the general point is that we need to ensure that everybody who goes to school actually gets an education. And that is an obligation of the school as well as the parent. But, there's a lot that was delivered at school, and there's a lot more that should be delivered in homework centers, done at school, etc., that can make it happen. But on the other level of it, I was visiting a high school the other day, and I won't call the name, but it could apply to anywhere. But when I looked at it, I said to myself, my God, this high school classroom looks the same as mine did when I went to JC 50-odd years ago, or 60 years ago, And there has been a lot that has changed in the way that other countries are equipping their classrooms with the smart boards and the computers and every desk and everything that enables learning. Youngsters now in prep school in other countries, in kindergarten, are teaching themselves to read from the computer, and we have to use. Those are some of the technologies that we have to bring to bear on the school, which will make us have 100% literacy coming out of primary school rather than the 50%
I had a discussion
that they're talking about.
I had a discussion on that very topic here a long time ago, and I must tell you, I wasn't pleased. I wasn't impressed with the kind of response I got from some of the educators, almost as if they were fearful that they were being automated out of their, not just their job, but their principal role in educating our children and so on. But
but you will always need the teacher. It is that the teacher's capacities are enhanced.
But I'd love to see that teacher with a remote in her hand.
Exactly. It can, and we can also utilize the benefits of the best teachers across the system. by beaming them into the different classrooms, and learn something. Sometimes you have just some gifted teachers at mathematics in particular. I mean, some teachers, in my experience, some teachers are, you will explain complex things in a way that everybody can understand. And they are, they don't come, not everybody has those gifts. And you should be able to utilize them where they appear and spread them as widely, spread that knowledge, that capacity, that brilliance as widely as possible.
Peter, we're out of time. We're almost up on 1 o'clock, but I want to thank you for coming on. We're going to continue this discussion. I have Damien King joining me shortly. And later on, I hope Gerard Johnson is going to be joining me as well. We want to delve into this social safety net issue, but thank you so much for helping us to get a better insight as to what the issues are. And continue to do well.
Thank you.
Dr. Peter Phillips, former Minister of Finance, former leader of the opposition, an old schoolmate of mine. Bo, are you there? Beauregard. Bo, look like I'm gone. Because I think New York has to leave us now. We take the break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We just said goodbye to New York. The daylight saving time, they normally go with us until 2 o'clock, but because of the change. Today we're talking about how we help the poor. Fancy title that the discussion has: designing an effective and affordable social safety net for the vulnerable population. But when you strip it right down, we're talking about how we help the poor, because we have poor people. And the poor will always be with us. And we believe we have an obligation, and we do. We play too much politics with it sometimes, but we have to find a way to help them, and that is what the PATH program is all about. But that is what all GCT exemption is all about too. So we can't charge GCT on anything that poor people buy, because poor people will vex with us. We have Dr. Damien King in studio. He is executive director of Capri, which is a hell of perhaps our leading research institution. But he's also a lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies. I know this is a subject that he has done a considerable amount of work on. Damien, tell me, we want to help the poor. Are we going about it the right way?
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Bruce. Well, that's a huge question, but let me just start off by reiterating what you were just talking about on the importance of this in terms of our range of economic and political issues. One of the disturbing things to discover is that if you were to do a sort of multi-generational analysis going all the way back maybe 150 years, you'd be surprised to discover how little economic and social mobility there is in Jamaica. That the people that we are now identifying as in need of help, and in the lowest quintile, that's the bottom fifth of the, economic distribution, pretty much are the descendants of people who were in the bottom quintile 150 years ago, or at least the bottom 2 quintiles.
Poverty is transitioning.
So it is multi-generational. It is going from one generation to the next. And what that tells you is that you really have to be cautious about, attributing that poverty to personal characteristics like laziness and lack of industry and lack of entrepreneurialism. It really is hard to climb out of that. Not that it's impossible, and individuals do it, but that is what tells you that it is something that the society must address and not leave it up to individuals. And there are a whole bunch of sort of practical economic reasons why it is good for economic growth and good for the entire society not to have such a highly skewed income distribution. So it's an incredibly important discussion, and I'm really glad that you're having it. How to do it? Well, the discussion so far that you have had, which was quite informative, has sort of gone about, has sort of mentioned in one way or another the various ways of dealing with it. You can try to minimize the consumption tax burden on items that are consumed by the poor. That's the zero-rated items. and the GCT, not putting GCT on items, you can do it by handing out goods and services. So that's what food relief does. And to some extent, NHT would fall under that category and programs like that. And then you have the widely popular cash transfer programs like PATH, which says that you identify those who are the poorest and you simply give them cash. Sometimes conditionally on certain behaviors by the household, like attending health clinics and their children attending school, but more and more now, unconditionally. Once you identify those who are in need, you give them a regular cash income every month. In the presence of all of that, we actually have a lot of international experience on which ones are more or less effective. And perhaps I want to start with the one that exercised a lot of the discussion between yourself and Peter earlier, which is using relief from consumption taxes, value-added taxes like GCT as a way of doing it. And the argument, which is not on its face unreasonable, is that if you can identify the staple items that constitute a large share of the budget of the poor, then you give them a little relief to the extent of 15% if you don't apply it to those items. The big problem with GCT relief is that most of the cost of doing it, what we call the tax expenditure, most of the fiscal cost of GCT relief doesn't go to the poor. When you decide that you're not putting GCT on bully beef, most of the bully beef consumed is not consumed by the poor. The poor consume a lot of it as a share of their budget. But most of the bully beef is consumed by people who are not poor. Does it surprise you to know that the rich consume more bully beef than the poor? No, because they are rich. When we don't put GCT on school bags, most of what is spent on school bags is spent by the rich because they are rich. They buy more expensive school bags and they buy school bags more often because, perhaps the children of the rich are less careful with their expensive school bags. So what we have a situation is that GCT relief is not targeted to the people who need it. I did a back of the envelope calculation once to work out what is the share of the tax revenue foregone in order to support what was then GCT relief on bully beef. And I came to the conclusion that using the poverty line, Jamaica's poverty line, less than 10% of the revenue foregone went to the benefit of households below the poverty line. That means more than 90% of what it was costing the government was not benefiting poor people.
What benefit was this?
The GCT relief on bully beef.
Yeah, well, bully beef, of course, a lot of poor people can't afford it.
This is the point.
Yeah.
But that is true.
But I'd love to see exactly now how much of the GCT relief on cornmeal, because even there, I know that there are people who buy bags of cornmeal to feed their dogs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I imagine that hypothetically, if there was a government program where the government actually went out and bought patties to distribute to poor people, and it came out that more than 90% of the patties were being distributed in Cherry Gardens and Barbican, it would be a scandal. We'd close down the program. But that is what happens when you use GCT relief for the purpose of social welfare.
Let's go to one extreme now. Suppose we're to say we will abolish all of them exemptions. And as Peter Phillips was suggesting, and perhaps reduce the GCT rate, right?
No, let's not confuse two things.
Yeah, but
let's do them one at a time.
Okay, one at a time. So let us
because reducing the GCT rate gives you the same mistargeting, but by a different means.
All right. Suppose the government were to charge GCT and everything.
Yes.
So that path lady now with the 3 children that she have to send to school, who now is getting a little $3,000 a month.
And that raises, let's say that raises the government an additional $2 billion.
So that she can now get $8,000 instead of the 3.
Exactly. And if you take that...
But can that work?
If you take that entire $2 billion and you put it into the PATH program, which amongst all of these options is very well targeted. There are very few homes in Cherry Gardens, very few households in Cherry Gardens are on the PATH program, if any. So what you're doing is you're taking expenditure, 10% of which is benefiting the target, those below the poverty line, and moving it to a program where 99% of the recipients are below the poverty line.
Well, if that makes such eminent sense, why can't we do it? The politics?
Economists don't run the country.
Who says so?
I can only think of a handful of countries in the entire world in recent economic history where economists actually made the decisions. Singapore is one.
Now, in the work Capri has done, were you ever able to nail down a figure as to how much revenue the government is surrendering by the exemptions and the zero rating?
We have made some estimates. I sort of don't have the figures from that particular report in my head.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially,
your recollection is that it was considerable.
It was considerable, and we assess the various programs essentially on the basis of how well they target, how well they hit the target that they're intended to, which is the only way to do it. And I think the shift that needs to be made is, instead of examining the welfare consequence of each individual program and policy, we need to look at the welfare obligations of government in its totality.
Yeah, well, that's where I wanted to go now.
Many of us accept that it is a legitimate role of government to redistribute income. But that must be viewed in its totality, by which I mean you don't need your tax regime to be progressive. You need your government budget to be regressive. And that is more effectively met on the expenditure side. Because the expenditure side you can target better than on the revenue side. Which is what is taking
me where I want to ask you to come with me. So let us take the cost of providing secondary education. The families in Cherry Gardens and Upper Norbrook are sending their children to the Woolmers and the KCs and the JCs and the Mergroves and so on.
And the Campions.
And the Campions. And they could easily...
Thank you very much.
They could easily draw the check and pay the tuition fees.
Indeed.
But we want to help the poor, so we tell us, no, free tuition for everybody. Mistake again?
Not well targeted. Once you recognize that fiscal resources are limited, which we almost recognize, then is that the best way to reach the target? And you can't abandon education, because you see that thing we're talking about at the start about what a strong legacy income and poverty have, that it goes from generation to generation. Education can break that.
Yes,
so you want to make sure that you're using education as part of your route.
One of the concerns that I have, though, is that to the extent that the mechanism you use to do the cash transfer is an item that is the subject of deliberation every year in the Standing Finance Committee, what guarantees you have that over time it remains static, so that the effectiveness of the benefit, how do we ensure that the benefit, I know that I'm going to go to school next year, unless the government is crazy, and I want to pay my tuition fees. I want to make sure that if I have to pay tuition fees and I really can't afford it, I want to make sure that that check I'm going to get from PATH is going to help me to pay the tuition fees.
Well, I mean, you do want to have that kind of that guarantee and that confidence, that you can afford critical things like this. But you probably don't want to take out of the discretion of a government how to allocate public expenditure in that way, because hopefully there will come a time when it becomes less necessary to do so, if your redistribution and social safety net programs are successful. But having said that, it is something that we would benefit from benchmarking. So, for example, the allocation to PATH, to take that example, is something that we should track against the rate of inflation. So we make sure that unless we have made a deliberate change of policy, then the allocation to PATH and the distribution to households keeps pace with inflation, so the purchasing power doesn't fall off.
Has it been doing that? I know that for this fiscal year, I know it's about 8 billion we spent. I didn't look to see whether or not that has held up against inflation.
I don't know. In the recent past, it has held up against inflation because we've had some significant increases.
Yeah.
But the allocation to PATH remains way inadequate for the gap that exists for the households that receive it and the income distribution we have.
I made the point earlier.
It is inadequate, both in terms of the amount given to each household, that is the depth of it, and the breadth of it, the number of households that should be in it.
Yes.
Ideally, we should have, just casually looking at the number of people, living below the poverty line, or even if you're above the poverty line, it really is a struggle from week to week. If you look at the number of people, we probably need PATH to reach, roughly estimating, twice as many households with twice as much money.
Yes. Well,
so we need roughly about 4 times the budget.
Yeah, and I've said that if you apply the poverty line, you're looking at about 500,000 people.
Okay.
And PATH now caters for 350,000.
Yeah, which could be financed by levying GCT and everything.
Yes. Now, which country has got it right?
Well, instead of saying which country, let me use the cash transfer program. Cash transfer programs were discovered in Mexico a few decades ago by a brilliant economist named Santiago Levy. And the idea was that, and because he was an economist and this was experimental, he gathered a whole lot of data before on how effective their programs were, then introduced cash transfer programs, Progressa, I think it was called, and then gathered the data and monitored it. And since then, because that one was so successful, cash transfer programs, literally identifying the poor and just giving them cash. And overcoming a lot of our bias against that kind of thing. A lot of our biases are, poor people are somehow, less responsible than people who are not poor and are more reckless and are less industrious. So the evidence, as the cash transfer program popularity spread from country to country, is overwhelming. And many countries have effective cash transfer programs. Mexico's is effective, Brazil's is effective, Malawi's is effective. And it shows that the benefit of cash transfer programs, the benefit of handing the poorest people cash, go way outside of just the household. First of all, overwhelmingly, households use the cash effectively. They use it to invest. They use it to invest in their children. So attendance goes up because the children have lunch money. They use it to invest in micro businesses. And what you find is that in communities where transfers of cash to the poorest individuals are instituted, crime falls in the communities. Communities are kept cleaner. Domestic violence is lower. And the economy of the community improves. So it's not just a matter of poor relief in the narrow sense that one household can afford more food. So it's not so much that many countries get it right, it's that a lot of countries have taken advantage of what we know about cash transfer programs, and it's working.
Can you give me any idea as to what we should be aiming at? I mean, given our particular circumstances, if we're spending $8 billion now, I don't know what percentage of the budget that is. I don't know what percentage of GDP that is. But are there any sort of standards that we really need to look at? Because if we know where we need to get to in order to really have an impact, and to have the kind of multiplier effect that you just spoke about, then that is what would perhaps drive us to look to say, well, how are we going to fund this? Well, let's fund this from some of the scattershot things that we've been doing.
Yes. You know, the point has been made before that amongst our scattershot efforts that are not effective in helping the poor is the NHT. Because NHT is based on taxing the entire population.
Can I hold you? You need to take a quick break. Can we do it now?
Sure.
And then we come back and we go up to 1:30.
Okay.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking today about how to help the poor, how to provide a good, effective, targeted social safety net for the most vulnerable in the population. I haven't you there with me, Dr. Damien King, and we've been talking about it's not that we don't have one, you know, we have one. And as a matter of fact, as Peter Phillips said earlier, the PATH program that we use to sort of transfer cash to poor people has been hailed by multilateral agencies as a good way to go and an example to other countries. But there's so much more that certainly I feel could be done to enable our intervention intending to help the poor so much more effective than it is now. And Damien was about to embark on another area that he feels we need to look at.
In terms of, thank you, Bruce. In terms of areas that we think of as a part of the social safety net, but are not effective in targeting the neediest, you know, the poorest quintile of the population, the poorest 1/5 of the population. And NHT is an example of that. And NHT is an example not because the people who run it are incompetent or malicious. They are not. It's not an example because they don't try their very best to put in a host of facilities to help as much as they can those who can barely afford their services and products. It is because built into the constitution of the NHT and the idea behind it, it does not meet the needs of the poorest. Consider this. Somebody who is in the poorest 1/5 of the population, when they got up this morning, do you think what was on their mind was, how am I going to afford that house? No, once you're in the business of helping people to own a house, you're helping needy people, you know, but you're not helping the poorest quintile.
But what?
And you're collecting from the broad population to help people who are not the poorest quintile.
Okay.
That's not a social program.
Okay. What if I were to say to you, well, look, the poorest quintile will never be able to afford the cheapest housing solution. So they have to depend on the government social housing program or whatever it is.
And not that either.
So what if I were to say, but that youngster who just graduated from your class at university and got married and starting a family and needs to own a house, his parents who live down in Pembroke Hall can't give him a deposit for a house. He has to find his way to. That's the man that NHT is really intended to help.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, given the gap that exists in the poorest part of the population,
yes,
why are we using any resources to help people who are not the poorest part of the population? Given the gap that we are here talking about and the needs of the poorest.
Because the poorest is not the only segment that needs help.
But you want to go to where the need is greatest.
Yes.
So are you redirecting resources that could go to where the need is greatest?
So ought you not to be proportional?
And a part of this has to do, even if you do it proportionally and you look at the need and the number of people in that poorest segment, it's hard to justify.
But maybe we ought to do like what we do with
people to own a house.
Maybe we ought to do like what we do with GCT and say that if your salary falls less than a certain amount, then we don't take no NHG from you, because we're not going to be able to provide you with no benefit.
That would be a good idea, because part of the problem, is, and one of the ways in which NHT holds back the economy is when you have this obligatory the contribution to NHT, when you add up the employer's contribution and the employee's contribution, is 5% of the wage bill. That is a huge tax.
Yes.
And it's a tax on formality. What you're doing is you're incentivizing the labor force to be informal. On both sides, on both the employee and the employer side. Because the employee doesn't think he's ever going to be able to take advantage of NHT. And so both of them exploit that niche, and you incentivize informality. And informality holds back the economy because that reduces productivity. So your whole economy is less productive because you're forcing a large segment of your labor force to work in a low productivity enclave of the economy.
Damien, can you spend some more time with me? Say yes.
10 minutes.
Say yes, because I have Jerry Johnson lined up. Get him on the line for me. Jerry, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hello, welcome, Jerry. Mr. Gerard Johnson, let me introduce you properly. Who was for many years the IDB representative in Jamaica. Jerry, welcome to the program.
Many thanks.
We're talking today about, as I mentioned to you before, how do we design a proper safety net for the vulnerable, social safety net for the vulnerable population. I have Damien King in studio with me. He'll be with me for a few more minutes. But you know the efforts that we have made. This has been a big issue with the IDB in terms of how to effectively transfer benefits to the most vulnerable in the community. Are we doing it right? Can we do it better? Jerry, you hearing me?
Yes, sorry, I'm here.
Yeah,
I did hear a little of what Damien said, and I have to echo what he said about Santiago Levy in Mexico. I was lucky enough to work with him for several years, and Jamaica is seen as a leader, but it's also a leader in something that maybe not everybody knows about. You talk about the most vulnerable, and you talk about a safety net. Sometimes it's not only delivered via money. For example, Huey, it was Julie Meeks, did a landmark bit of work decades ago showing that just with interventions that don't cost any more money but are well thought through and can be delivered by a mother with the help of a very little outside supervision, that over decades where they followed these children who were between 0 and 2 years old, all they were getting was stimulation, no extra diet, no extra money was given to this. 20 years on, 25 years on, those groups of children who benefited from this intervention were drastically better off in terms of not going to jail, finishing school, getting jobs. In other words, they escaped from the trap, the intergenerational trap that Damien was describing. So just to say that it's not always about money, but often it is. I think that the experience in Central America, who of course went on from the Mexican experience, was maybe very relevant to Jamaica because of the size of the countries and for something else. When I got involved there, it was in a post-war, but the wars were ending. Remember the civil wars in Central America? They were ending in the 90s, and they realized that the wars, in many ways, or that the violence that we suffer here, are also a result of an intergenerational poverty and hopelessness. And they designed very interesting programs to not just provide a basic diet and a basic living standard, but to also provide the tools to climb out of needing to be given help. Is what Damien was talking about, that it's conditional. You go to school, you get health care. But they went a step further. They realized that, when the Spanish invaded and basically took away the land, not a very different experience to what happened here, the people, let's say upon independence, whose land was taken away, didn't have anything. And the ability to break out of that was basically zero. As Damien's talking about housing, they would love to have the problem of wondering how to finance their house. They're not even close to having the problem. The last thing I'll say is the land. So land reform is to be something that should be considered part of a social safety net. Thanks.
Jerry, Damien has to leave us, and I would love him to comment on what you had to say before he does.
Hi, Jerry. Nice to be chatting with you again. No, I think Jerry gets it exactly right. They would love to be thinking about how to finance their house, but that is not even on their radar. And in particular, this idea of not thinking of everything the way macroeconomists like myself do, which is just in terms of allocation of expenditure, which clearly is important, but identifying based on best practice effective interventions that really are not about money. It takes a very small amount of money. It just takes building the capacity and having the idea that you look at the research and you look at what is effective, and you end up being much more effective even with your modest expenditure than you could be. And the program you mentioned, the research you mentioned with Julie, is spot on. A great piece of research.
Damien, you say you have to go. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Take care.
Don't change your number because we'll need to call you again.
Okay.
Dr. Damien King has to leave us. Jerry, where I want to go, and I want you to walk with me and tell me where I'm falling off the edge. The PATH program, which we celebrate as an effective mechanism for identifying the people who are in need and facilitating the cash transfer to them. That's $8 billion. Can we talk about some bigger ticket items? Look at the amount of money that we spend in order to provide tuition-free education at our secondary schools. Look at the amount of money we provide in order to subsidize, at one time to the tune of 80%. I believe now it may be more like 2/3 of the cost of tertiary education, university education. The amount of money we provide to finance program that I have to accept responsibility for, the removal of user fees at our public hospitals. If we were to add up all of that money and try to determine now how much of that money is actually benefiting persons who live uptown, people who could well afford to pay for these services, if we were to be able to take that money out, then maybe the PATH program would not be an 8 billion program. Maybe it would be an 80 billion program. Am I making sense?
100%. I think that somebody earlier, Peter Phillips, or was it Damien, maybe it was you, made the point that it's a very leaky delivery mechanism to do things like what you described, to subsidize Campion for everybody, versus what everybody internationally and locally have recognized as an incredibly efficient delivery mechanism, which is the PATH, which, the targeting is bang on, the delivery mechanism is efficient. I mean, so much so during COVID, luckily we had it, and that it was served as, it could be built on as a platform to not just deal with structural poverty, but with a shock, an unusual thing like a pandemic, where a group of vulnerable people suddenly widens. Because, this term of vulnerable is taken as a static thing, but, like this example of a pandemic, it can suddenly expand. And there's something else I want to say quickly about vulnerability. There's an urgent process happening, or dynamic happening. The flattening out of the population growth in Jamaica is which everybody has talked about, everybody knows about it. The implications are dire. When your population is growing, you can add to production with more people. But in Jamaica, with productivity, total factor productivity has been falling for decades. When you add falling productivity to falling factors of production, that spells more poverty. So, in terms of social safety nets or vulnerability safety nets, what you don't want is to have a growing pool of people who are in that net, who need that net, and a shrinking number of people who are contributing to building the net. And that's exactly what's happening in Jamaica. And what masks it, I think, maybe I think I won't be alone, is remittances. Remittances are the unspoken single most important safety net, I think, in Jamaica. I don't know what you think of that.
I'm sorry?
I don't know if you would agree with that, but I do think that remittances give us a sense of that we have time, that this is an issue that you brought to the table today of the safety net. This is a very urgent issue. It's one that I think Damien linked it to productivity.
Yes.
And the fact is that the pool of people who are going to be in the net is going to be growing as Jamaica gets poorer due to the demographic issue.
Right. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't want my listeners to believe that I'm being naive. I spent so many years of my life in politics, and I don't want them to feel that. Well, listen to this joker suggesting now that the Minister of Finance, the government must go to Parliament tomorrow and put GCT and flour on everything. How far can we not go, Jerry, based on your experience of other countries? Because I don't know if there's any country in the world that imposes point of sale tax on basic food like flour and milk and so on. I don't know. There may very well be. But I don't necessarily want to go from one extreme to the other. What I do feel is, and I would love to see some numbers, Capri has done some research and Damien promised that he's going to let me see those numbers. I'd love to see how much revenue are we giving up by these across the board exemptions on these basic items. Let us identify what are the items that we feel are so sensitive to the poor that we have to exempt them from tax. How much tax are we giving up? What difference could that make to the PATH program? How much more benefit could that PATH program provide? How many more people we could include in the program? Because right now we're catering to 350,000 people, but there are more than 500,000 people who are below the poverty line in Jamaica. And as Damien suggested, even those who are just marginally above the poverty line, they need help as well. How far can we go?
I commit. I think your call for data, I think Damien is Mr. Data. I'll commit, whether it's on the air or maybe not. I'll be happy to look for those numbers, I'm sure, and I'll try and get some comparative analysis of other countries that maybe took that step that you're describing to be more aggressive about moving from 8 to 80, as you said. I mean, obviously, those are numbers you're pulling, I think, using those as demonstrative. You're not trying to say those are the numbers. But I think that definitely is the direction we have to go in. The point I'm trying to make in addition to that is that while we have to come up with a better way of delivering the help, and of course, what is being provided now is not enough even to live on. I mean, it's a nice fill-up, but it does not. You could not base your existence on what is provided by PATH. And what worries me is the pool of people, extreme poverty, but extreme poverty, as you just said, vulnerable is what we're talking about. Not, we mix terms, but extreme poverty, and we also say vulnerable, but those two are very different things. Vulnerable includes a lot more people, as you just said, than those who are in extreme poverty. And that number is at risk of growing, not shrinking. And the number of people who are being called on to contribute to the net is shrinking. So you've got beneficiaries rising and contributors shrinking. That's a very dramatic and very that's where leadership is called for see something like this a decade in advance, because it takes a long time to solve.
Are there any recent studies that have been done on this that you're aware of, Jerry?
Yes,
that you could refer me to?
There's a very interesting one out of Guatemala. What I'll do is after the program, I'll send the three. Before the program, I made a couple calls. There are three that I think would be relevant to Jamaica because of the size of the economy and the size of population. In other words, countries that are middle income,
yes,
below to 10 million population, and who've actually and who have a very large vulnerable group. So I'll be happy to share that with you.
One of the areas that and it was something I was discussing with Peter Phillips earlier, and to some extent with Damien as well. And it is that, I mean, when we are limited as we are because of the resources available, to the small amount of assistance that we are able to provide, helpful as it is to the beneficiaries. But in truth and in fact, and you made the point a while ago, it's not even sufficient to sustain them. It helps, but they can't live off that. And Damien was making the point that what is happening is that poverty now becomes generational. Ought we not, if we can reconfigure the resources, we may not have to raise $1 more of revenue. But if we can use the resources better, would we not be able to look at a program that is more creative, a program that is designed to take as many people as possible out of poverty? I mean, there are some, for example, the poor old lady who perhaps has mental challenges. She perhaps will be poor for the rest of her life, and we may just have to continue to provide her with as much help as we can. But a young mother in her mid-20s who has 3 children and has to depend on the PATH program, what that PATH program really ought to be trying to do is to say, now, how can we upgrade you so that maybe 5 years' time, 10 years' time, maybe you don't need PATH program anymore. Your kids would have done better. Isn't that a critical component? I mean, this thing can be a life sentence for people that forever you must be depending on this government check every month.
100%. I think the focus has to be on, I think maybe the good word to use instead of vulnerability, or in addition to vulnerability, is dependency. To describe it as a group of people who will always be dependent, and there is no path, forgive the pun, but there's no path for some people, and they will always be wards of the state, and that's true in every country. But and the focus, therefore, I think of this conversation is on, well, first of all, yes, those people need much more than they're getting, and as you said, it could be done with zero budget, net zero increment to current budgetary allocation, to smarter way of spending it. The other thing, of course, then, is the focus on those who can become independent. And the way things are now, just to deliver a check, that's not going to do it. I think the conditional aspects where children, the mother gets the benefit if the child goes to school. The mother gets the benefit if the child, can show that it went to the doctor. I think that's an excellent start. That's been celebrated and recognized around the region, what Jamaica has done. But it's not enough. When you have, at the end of slavery, people who are shown the gates of the plantation and said, well, goodbye. Of course, that's something that, so intergenerational poverty was created for, the majority at that point. And to break it, and you have to break it quickly because it's an urgent situation, more than, getting children to go to school with flawed education systems, getting children to go to hospitals with limited medical services. That if we want to really increase independence so that they can take care of their dependents, I think that more dramatic things have to be done than are being done now.
Jerry,
for example, land reforms.
Yeah, we're being joined, Jerry, by Dr. Wesley, who you know well. Wesley is former financial secretary, former director general of the Planning Institute, and I wanted to bring him into discussion. Wesley, would you believe that me, a politician, same one who went to Parliament and make up a whole panel about free education and free health care, the discussion that I've been provoking today is that the best way to help the poor? So we exempt flour and rice and sugar and milk and so on from GCT because poor people need that. But then the rich man is buying the rice and the flour and all that. The rich man is getting the GCT free prescription drug. And I have Jerry Johnson on the phone. We had Peter Phillips earlier. We had Damien King as well to see, are we doing it the right way? What is your view?
Good afternoon to you and your listeners. Hello, Jerry. Nice hearing from you.
Hello.
We are doing some things right. We had a series of reforms which we had to undertake for the economy's sake. But we're dealing with political economy here, where you have winners and losers. And during the period of the reforms, you had to put in place social policies that would take care, to some extent, of those who are going to lose out. And during the 1990s, we had a whole series of social programs that were undertaken, coming out of a reform of the social safety net program, as you are aware. PATH was one of them, JSIF, quite a series of those things. What I'm hearing you listening, coming in, Mr. Golding, saying is that we need a review of this process. It's almost 25 years now, and some of those programs are no longer relevant because of the passage of time. The economy has changed. The structure of the population, as Jerry was pointing out earlier, is changing and changing very rapidly, and it's not positive for us in terms of how we go forward. The key thing is to provide more resources for some areas and less resources for others. It's a political economy issue. There are going to be winners and losers, and it's not a problem that can be solved only by economists. Economics is the backbone of public policy, but you have to take account of the political realities, the social, the anthropological. All these other issues have to come into play for you to have a proper public policy mix that is acceptable and can be implemented. If you rely only on the economists, you're going to get a focus mostly on efficiency, and that may not be implementable in the short run, but it has to be part of the mix. So I would say we're getting some things right. We are losing the battle on some fronts. We're not having enough resources, mainly because the growth in the economy is not sufficient. Our productivity levels have been falling in critical sectors. And even in those sectors that are doing fairly well, BPO, tourism, etc., the rate of productivity growth is much slower than, say, manufacturing and industry and agro-processing. And so the overall growth trend in the economy is lower, an average of 1% for the last 100 years. Our growth period of great achievement was 1955 to 1970, around that period, averaging about 9%. We're not going to be able to repeat that anytime soon.
And half of that would be good.
Yes.
Jerry, you want to comment on what Wesley had to say?
100%. What Wesley said, I totally endorse. The fact is, Jamaica, and I like the way you said it, are we doing anything right? Jamaica has wins, and although the conversation today points to ways to improve it, like a smarter way of delivering the money. The fact is, Jamaica has developed internationally recognized mechanism for reaching the most vulnerable, and I think that's not a small thing. It is. Even during the pandemic, the Auditor General looked at it inside out, upside down, and she's very good at finding things that are wrong And so we have a very recent update on the evaluation, and it passed with flying colors. I think it's something Jamaica should be proud of.
Mm-hmm. Tell me something, Wesley.
Yeah.
We've been talking here now about, whether or not we should reconfigure our GCT point of sale arrangement to be able to do more direct transfer to the poor. You talk about winners and losers. Have we? I know we have done some work on it, and I believe the IDB was part of, and the IMF were all partners in this exercise. But do we need to pull back now on some of the concessions, waivers that we are providing because we want to attract investors and investment and so on? You want me to tell you something? When I was in office and we were struggling to try and close the budget, and we looked at the amount of money we were providing in terms of waivers in the hotel industry, I asked a question. I said, tell me something. All them people who get them waivers, have we ever seen what their financial statements look like to determine whether or not they really need this kind of benefit?
Yeah.
Some people are ready to stone me. Now, should we not be looking at that as well?
Well, we have. And during your time, as you recall, Mr. Golden, there was a lot of reforms, particularly with the help of the IDB, in cutting back. And we now have a set amount in the budget each year, which is allocated across all the sectors, just to limit the amount. And so more resources are made available for investment and social programs because of those reforms. The IDB was a major player in this effort. So we have made some changes. Can
we do more?
There may be room. I haven't looked at it recently, but I do know we have reduced what Damien referred to as tax expenditure in this regard, and that allowed us to provide more resources for some of the social programs and investment in infrastructure and other things.
Jerry, your thoughts?
Yes, well, Wesley is being very humble, but I remember the origin of that reform, and Wesley. The truth is, the idea of entering that very difficult space of reducing and almost eliminating those tax expenditures, those waivers, came from your side, and Wesley was at the head of it. And it did. I mean, there was, you probably remember. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think Wesley showed me it was an entire, a department or a section. That's all they did was process these things. Yes. And there were also work done by the PIOJ, which I think Wesley knows a little bit about, where about the distortion to the economy. So part of that loss of growth that Wesley was talking about was also due to the waivers that are provided on base of who you know. Yeah. Or on the fact that you've always got them, so you keep getting them. So I thought it was an incredibly important reform.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I mean, we could continue this a long time, Maybe we have to do a segment 2 on this, because I think it's important. One of the things that, and Wesley, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to explore this with you, but maybe in 60 seconds. Damien expressed the concern that the people who are on path now, the poor, their grandparents were poor too.
Yeah.
And you don't want people to be dying in poverty. You want them to come out of the damn poverty.
Well, in fact, part of the reform on the path was to have what we call a graduation, that people would eventually graduate from. But
apart from those persons who have died, has anybody left the path program?
Some have migrated, yes. Some have not just overseas, but in other
I would love to see a situation where it had, of course, it would require more resources, but where it had such a strong component for upskilling, upgrading, that we could even say, now look, every path beneficiary, a review is going to be done every 5 years to see how well have you done. You haven't done so well, all right, you still need the program. But you have done well, so you don't have to be on the program anymore.
But that was the point I was making, that many of these programs and projects, in some instances, which have gone on to become even programs, they now need a major review.
Yes.
We have not had a fundamental review, and things have changed dramatically. And I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah, we're out of time. Jerry Johnson.
Yes, sir.
I'm so glad that you were able to join us. Thank you so much, Jerry, for helping us with this subject. I think it's important, and I hope the listeners would have appreciated it. I mean, you can look on YouTube tomorrow. The program will be up there to see what the comments are, because I've been very encouraged at the level of interest that many, particularly those in the diaspora, because they heard the first hour of this, the interest that they take. So thank you very, very much. Wesley, thanks for joining me in studio.
Most welcome.
My pleasure. Bye, Jerry.
This is Jamaica Live. We've been on Bridge 99. Hope you enjoyed the discussion today. Hope you found it useful. And of course, God willing, I'll be back here next week, Monday, not talking about this subject. We find a new one, but we're going to delve into it as we do every Monday. God bless you. Have a good week.